The sun hung low over the vast expanse of Jack's ranch, casting long golden streaks across the fields. The air smelled of fresh earth and hay, and the distant mooing of cattle punctuated the peaceful morning. Jack leaned against the wooden fence, sipping his coffee, feeling the kind of satisfaction only a man who worked his own land could understand. This ranch had been in his family for 3 generations, a legacy of sweat, grit, and an unbreakable connection to the land. The illusion of tranquility shattered as a parade of pastel-colored blouses and khaki slacks marched toward him. At the front, a woman strutted with the kind of entitlement only years of unchecked authority could cultivate. She was impeccably styled, her platinum blonde bob sharp enough to cut glass. Gold bangles clinked on her wrists as she held up a clipboard like a royal decree. Karen Jack had dealt with her before, president of the Homeowners Association, self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, and a master of turning small inconveniences into full-blown campaigns of tyranny. But she had never stepped foot on his land before. Karen stopped just shy of his porch, surveying the ranch with an exaggerated frown. Behind her, HOA members murmured in agreement, their noses wrinkling as if the fresh country air personally offended them. Jack felt his muscles tense. This wasn't a social call. "Good morning, Jack," Karen chirped, her voice laced with false politeness. "We were just admiring this space. Such a shame it's being used so inefficiently." Jack's grip on his coffee cup tightened. "My land is being used just fine, Karen." She ignored him, flipping through the pages on her clipboard. "You see, as you technically fall within the expanded jurisdiction of the HOA, congratulations, by the way, we've had a little vote, and we've decided that your property would serve the community much better as a shared recreational space." Jack set his coffee down on the porch railing, his heart beat a steady thud in his ears. "You voted? You think a group of yuppies in a cul-de-sac gets to decide what happens to my land?" Karen sighed, as if explaining simple concepts to a stubborn child. "We understand this is an adjustment, but progress requires change. We envision walking trails, a dog park, maybe even a lovely picnic area. Don't worry, Jack, you're still welcome to live here. But the community will have access to enjoy this unused space." Jack took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Unused? This is an active ranch, Karen. I've got cattle, I've got crops. You can't just waltz in here and claim it." "Oh, we can," she countered smoothly, handing him a thick packet of documents. "You'll find all the paperwork right here. Annexation, land use adjustments, and community planning proposals. The vote was unanimous." Jack barely glanced at the papers before shoving them back at her. "This is my land, bought and paid for. I have the deed." Karen's smile didn't falter, but something in her eyes gleamed with amusement, as if she enjoyed watching him struggle to comprehend the inevitable. "You're welcome to bring that up at the next meeting. But really, Jack, it's already decided. The HOA has spoken." Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd behind her. Jack recognized a few of the faces, people he'd known for years. Neighbors who had never once set foot on his land now looked at it like it was theirs. The audacity of it made his blood boil. He exhaled sharply through his nose, forcing his temper down. "Get off my land, Karen. You and your little entourage. Now." Karen sighed, stepping back with an exaggerated shake of her head. "This hostility isn't necessary. We're building a community, Jack. You can either cooperate or make things difficult for yourself." With that, she turned on her heel, motioning for the HOA members to follow. They strolled away as if they had just completed a routine inspection, their chatter filled with talk of park benches and jogging paths. Jack stood rooted to the spot, fists clenched at his sides, his coffee long forgotten. Hours later, he found the first sign that they were serious. A group of neighborhood kids were running through his field, trampling the fresh grass as if they had every right to be there. Parents watched from a distance, completely unconcerned. By the next afternoon, a family had set up a picnic under one of his trees. He approached them, demanding they leave, but they just smiled and waved. "It's community land now," they called cheerfully. Jack's patience wore thinner by the day. The trespassing escalated, Dog walkers ignored his fences, joggers cut through his fields, and soon someone had the audacity to put up actual signs that read, "Future site of HOA Community Park." Then one evening he found his fence, his sturdy, well-maintained fence, cut open. A gaping hole left wide enough for his cattle to wander. Panic surged through him as he rushed to round up his livestock, some of which had wandered dangerously, close to the road. It took him hours to fix the damage, and by the time he did, the fury in his gut had settled into something colder, sharper. The next morning, he walked straight into the HOA meeting. Conversations died as he strode to the center of the room, slamming a stack of bills onto the table. "That's for my broken fence. My livestock could have been killed because of you." Karen, seated at the head of the table, didn't even blink. "Oh dear," she murmured, voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Maybe you should have secured your property better." Laughter rippled through the group. Jack's jaw tightened. She wasn't just stealing his land, she was mocking him while doing it. He took a deep breath, staring down at the woman who had declared war on his home. She thought he was just some stubborn farmer, too dumb to fight back. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Jack had never considered himself a violent man, but as he stood at the edge of his property, staring at the freshly cut section of his fence, his hands trembled with the need to act. The broken wooden posts lay scattered in the grass like fallen soldiers, and his cattle had been spooked, some of them still wandering at the far end of the field. He took a deep breath, inhaling the damp scent of overturned earth, trying to steady the slow, burning fury in his chest. This wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. It was a full-blown invasion. Karen and her little army of HOA lackeys had taken things too far. Voting to steal his land was one thing, but deliberately destroying his property, letting his livestock roam into danger, that was a declaration of war. The next few days tested every ounce of patience he had left. More people strolled onto his land, treating it like an open park. Strangers he'd never seen before brought their dogs, allowing them to chase his chickens. Someone even left a set of folding chairs in the middle of his pasture, as if claiming the spot for themselves. When he confronted them, they had the audacity to act surprised, as if he was the trespasser. "It's just land, buddy," a man said, shooing Jack away with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Relax." Jack saw red. His land, his livelihood, the place his father had built from nothing, the soil his grandfather had tilled by hand. And they expected him to relax? He stormed to Karen's house that evening. The cookie-cutter suburban home looked as pristine as ever, her perfectly trimmed hedges standing like sentinels on either side of the driveway. The porch light flickered on before he even knocked, as if she had been expecting him. When she opened the door, she wore a smug little smile, her arms crossed over her chest like a queen addressing a peasant. "Jack," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "What a surprise." "Cut the act," he growled. "You think this is funny? You and your goons cut my fence. My cattle could have been killed." Karen feigned innocence, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. "Oh dear, that sounds terrible. But I don't see how that's our fault. Maybe your fence just wasn't up to code." Jack clenched his jaw so hard his teeth ached. "Stay off my land, Karen." She let out a small, breathy laugh, tilting her head. "Oh, Jack, you're being so dramatic. If you just work with us, this wouldn't have to be so difficult." He didn't bother responding. Talking to her was like reasoning with a brick, if the brick wall was smug, self-absorbed, and drunk on power. As he turned to leave, she called out, "By the way, the board is considering installing some community picnic tables near your barn. Isn't that exciting?" Jack didn't stop walking, didn't acknowledge the taunt, but in that moment he knew there was no fixing this. No negotiation, no compromise. They wouldn't stop until he had nothing left. That night Jack sat on his porch, staring out over his fields, letting his mind work through the problem. He had spent too much time playing defense, trying to reason with people who had no respect for him or his land. It was time to go on the offensive. By morning, he had a plan. First, he visited the county office, digging through every legal document he could find on HOA regulations and property rights. It took hours of searching, but when he found what he needed, a slow, satisfied grin spread across his face. The HOA had overstepped. More importantly, he had the perfect way to remind them whose land they were messing with. His next stop was a local electrician. By the end of the week, Jack stood at the edge of his property, watching as the final piece of his new electrified fence was installed. It was a beauty, 6 feet tall, reinforced, and fully legal under county zoning laws. He had even gone the extra step of adding bright yellow warning signs every few feet, just in case Karen tried to cry foul. The timing couldn't have been better. Late that afternoon, Jack spotted them, Karen and a few HOA members, striding toward his land with the confidence of people who believed they were untouchable. They didn't even hesitate. One of the men went to push open the gate. A sharp zap filled the air. The man yelped, stumbling back, shaking his hand furiously. Karen's head snapped toward Jack, who stood by his porch, sipping his coffee like he hadn't just watched one of her minions get jolted like a bug hitting a zapper. "Jack!" she shrieked, stomping toward the fence. "What the hell is this?" Jack set his coffee down, stretching out his arms in mock surprise. "Oh, you mean my legal electrified fence? The one keeping trespassers off my private property? That one?" Karen's face darkened. "This is insane. You can't just—" "I can," Jack interrupted smoothly. "And I did." She jabbed a manicured finger toward the warning sign. "This is a hazard. Someone could get hurt." Jack shrugged. "Then maybe they should stay off my land." One of the HOA members muttered something under his breath, looking more hesitant now. The others shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that they weren't as untouchable as they'd thought. Karen, however, wasn't backing down. She squared her shoulders, lifting her chin. "This isn't over," she snapped. "You can't just wall yourself off from the community like some paranoid." Jack grinned, cutting her off. "Oh, but Karen, you said this land belonged to the community. I'm just making sure it stays safe." The muscle in Karen's jaw twitched. She had lost this round, and she knew it. Without another word, she spun on her heel and marched away, her HOA lackeys trailing behind her, throwing wary glances at the fence. Jack leaned against the porch railing, watching them retreat. He knew Karen wasn't finished. She would push back. She would throw everything she had at him. But for the first time in weeks, Jack wasn't worried. She thought she could take his land. She had no idea what kind of fight she'd just started. Jack didn't have to wait long for Karen's counterattack. 3 days after installing the electrified fence, he woke to the sound of furious knocking on his door. The sun had barely crested the horizon, and already the day promised trouble. He swung the door open to find 2 uniformed officers standing on his porch, their patrol car idling in the driveway. "Mr. Carter?" the taller officer asked. Jack folded his arms. "That's me. We received a complaint about an illegal hazardous structure on your property." The officer motioned toward the fence with a practiced neutrality, but Jack could already see where this was going. "Let me guess," Jack said dryly. "A certain HOA president called you?" The officer didn't confirm, but he didn't deny it either. "Mind if we take a look?" Jack stepped aside, letting them walk the perimeter of the fence. He followed at a leisurely pace, letting them see the freshly posted county permit he had framed and zip-tied to one of the wooden posts, right above a bright yellow sign that read, "Warning, electrified fence, do not touch." The shorter officer nodded as he read over the paperwork. "Everything looks in order," he admitted. Karen's shrill voice cut through the morning air before Jack could enjoy the moment. "Absolutely not. You have to do something." She marched up, flanked by a handful of HOA members, her face twisted in manufactured outrage. "This fence is a public menace. It's dangerous. Someone could be electrocuted." Jack leaned against the fence post, his lips twitching. "Funny thing about warning signs, Karen. They tend to prevent that from happening." Karen ignored him, her wild eyes fixed on the officers. "You can't possibly allow this. This is a community space." The taller officer sighed. "Ma'am, this is private property. Mr. Carter has all the necessary permits. As long as no one trespasses, there's no danger." Karen's face reddened. "You don't understand. He's cutting us off. We voted on this land." Jack chuckled, crossing his arms. "You can vote on whatever you want, Karen. Doesn't make it legal." The officers exchanged a look, realizing this wasn't a matter for law enforcement. The taller one tipped his hat. "Everything here checks out, Mr. Carter. Have a good day." Karen sputtered as they walked back to their car. "You can't just leave." "Unless there's a crime," the officer called back. "There's nothing for us to do here." Jack watched as Karen's composure cracked. Her smugness drained away, replaced with something meaner, more desperate. The moment the patrol car disappeared down the road, she whirled on him. "You think you're so clever," she hissed. "You will regret this." Jack's grin widened. Looking forward to it, she turned, storming off with her little entourage, in tow. But Jack wasn't stupid. He knew this wasn't the last of it, and he was right. The next morning, he found a letter taped to his fence, a formal notice from the HOA, declaring that his fence violated community aesthetics and demanding its removal within 7 days. Jack laughed so hard he nearly dropped his coffee. Community aesthetics? On a ranch? He walked inside, grabbed a red marker, and scrawled across the letter in bold capital letters, "Denied." Then, for good measure, he taped it right back to the fence. By the end of the week, the HOA had escalated. Karen filed a civil complaint against him, citing non-compliance with community regulations. Jack responded the only way he knew how. He lawyered up. He hired a property rights attorney, a sharp old man who had spent the last 3 decades making people like Karen miserable. Together, they compiled every single law, permit, and zoning regulation that backed Jack's claim. And then Jack went on the offensive. Using county records, he dug into the HOA's finances, looking for any dirt he could find. What he uncovered made his blood run cold. Mismanaged funds, unapproved expenditures, and violations of their own bylaws. Jack had them. When he filed a counterclaim, demanding a full financial audit of the HOA, the effect was immediate. At the next board meeting, Karen looked rattled. Gone was her usual smugness, replaced by tight lips and darting eyes. The other board members whispered among themselves, uneasy. Jack leaned back in his chair, watching Karen squirm. "Something wrong." "Karen?" he drawled. She shot him a glare but said nothing. Jack grinned. He wasn't just fighting back anymore. He was winning. The tension in the HOA meeting room was thick enough to choke on. Karen sat at the head of the table, her carefully manicured nails tapping against the wood in rapid succession. The other board members avoided her gaze, their confidence unraveling, thread by thread, as Jack's counterclaim loomed over them like a thundercloud ready to burst. Jack took his time, stretching his legs and leaning back in his chair as if he didn't have a care in the world. But inside, he was savoring every second of Karen's unraveling. He had played this game patiently, endured the underhanded tactics, the arrogance, the sheer entitlement. But now, the final move was his. "I think we should discuss Mr. Carter's unreasonable actions," Karen finally said, her voice brittle. "This entire ordeal has been a massive disruption to the community." Jack smirked. "You mean my property?" Karen's jaw tightened. "You're being difficult on purpose. We tried to be reasonable." "Reasonable?" Jack let out a short laugh. "You tried to steal my land, cut down my fence, and when that didn't work, you sent the cops after me. You harassed me with fines that don't even hold up in court." He leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "And now, thanks to that little civil suit you filed, we all get to see what the HOA has been doing with its money." Karen stiffened. Her fingers gripped the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Jack pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "Here's something interesting. The HOA has been charging residents extra beautification fees for years, but the county records show that none of that money ever went to actual improvements." A murmur swept through the board members. Jack wasn't done. He flipped open another document. "Then there's this. According to expense reports, a large sum of HOA funds has been paid to a company called KS Property Management. He turned to Karen. Ring any bells? Karen didn't move. Jack tapped the page. Because when I looked them up, I found out it's registered under your name. The room went dead silent. One of the board members, an older man who had stayed quiet for most of the meeting, cleared his throat. Karen, is this true? Karen's mask cracked. This is ridiculous. She forced a laugh, but it was shaky. This is just a misunderstanding. Those funds were for your personal expenses, Jack cut in. I had an accountant review the records. Money from HOA dues mysteriously disappeared into this shell company, which, by the way, has no employees, no services, and no business activity except for receiving payments from the HOA. He tilted his head. Where did all that money go, Karen? Her face blanched. Jack let the silence drag. Let them see her for what she was. Finally, one of the board members, a middle-aged woman who had once loyally defended Karen, pushed her chair back. I had no idea about this. She looked at Karen with a mixture of disbelief and anger. Is it true? Karen shot to her feet, slamming a hand on the table. This is an attack, she shrieked. He's lying. He's trying to turn you all against me. Jack stayed calm. I sent copies of these reports to a lawyer, and as of this morning, I also filed a formal complaint with the County Fraud Division. Karen's breath hitched. The color drained from her face. The board members were no longer looking at Jack. They were all looking at her. The older man spoke up again, his voice grave. Karen, if this is real, we could all be held accountable. Karen's lips parted, but no sound came out. She was floundering. For the first time since this battle started, she wasn't in control. Jack stood up, gathering his papers with deliberate slowness. You tried to take my land, Karen, but it turns out you're the one who's going to lose everything. Then he turned to the board. You have two options. Either dissolve this joke of an HOA and make things right with the community. He looked at Karen, or get dragged down with her. Karen's breath came fast and uneven. She spun toward the board members, her voice shrill with desperation. You can't do this. I built this HOA. I run this community. The older man exchanged a look with the other board members. Then with a slow, deliberate motion, he slid his board resignation letter and across the table. I refuse to be a part of this, he muttered. One by one, the others followed suit. Karen looked around, her world crumbling in real time. Jack watched. As the realization hit her, she had lost. Completely, irrevocably. Her fingers twitched at her side, her shoulders trembling. Then in a final, pathetic attempt to save face, she turned on her heel and stormed toward the door. But before she could escape, Jack spoke one last time. Oh, and Karen? She froze, her back still to him. Jack grinned. The county fraud investigator should be knocking on your door any day now. She stiffened. For a moment she just stood there, barely breathing. Then, without another word, she shoved open the door and disappeared into the night. Silence filled the room. Then, the older man let out a weary sigh. Well, I suppose we have a lot to fix. Jack smirked. I'd start with tearing down those ridiculous HOA rules. The man actually chuckled. Not a bad idea. Jack nodded, feeling a sense of finality settle over him. It had taken patience, strategy, and more stress than he'd care to admit, but in the end, he had won. His land was his. And no one, not even Karen, would ever take it from him again.